Ghost in the Shell is one of the most influential animes of all time. This movie has been well received not only from fans of the medium, but some of the most respected film critics of all time have given it glowing reviews. But how has it aged? In 2021, the time of recording this video, if you're watching later, just put your headspace in 2021. Is it still one of the best watches of the medium? I sat down and watched the 4K remaster on my TV to judge whether or not I thought that was the case. And there's rust. I'm going to be honest, there's some angles to this movie I'm going to get into first before the heaps of praise where you may struggle a bit. First and most obviously, do not watch the English dub. I actually had to turn that off because it was so shockingly bad. It genuinely sounds like the main character is coming through as text-to-speech.
We don't know a lot either. No clue about age, sex, or background. All we know for certain is this person is on the international most wanted list for crimes including stock manipulation.
And I don't like being hard on voice actors like that, but this was actually like movie experience ruining bad for me personally. So I'm going to recommend, if you're going to watch this movie, please find subs, not dubs, unless you have to, in which case, that's fine. And it was actually, I don't know if I necessarily even blame the individual performers because it was genuinely every character. All of them had pretty bad vocal performances, which to me tells me their direction or possibly the editing putting them together was where the issues came in, because it sounded like they were in different rooms, different conversations. It just really, for one of the most influential, well-reviewed animes ever, you expect a lot better from a dub, and I'm just thoroughly disappointed. But with the IMAX soon coming out in theaters, I know a lot of people are gonna be asking, does the visual impact of this movie become enhanced with modern upscaling, upgrades, maybe a massive screen? And the answer to that is, for a lot of the shots, yes. I mean, this is one of the most visually striking movies, not even just of anime, of all time. I mean, if you include the time in which the movie was released as well, that only becomes more true. But taking it into modern context, even with so many other movies doing what Ghost in the Shell did, it still stands out as the cream of the crop in terms of body modification. Body horror actually was a lot more prevalent than I remember it being. And just the use of colors and the art can only be more enjoyable with this upscaling. Absolutely worth it, which is not the case for a lot of movies like Akira. I actually watched the original and like the new remastered, and I didn't find it to be that much more worth it. Here, Ghost in the Shell, after looking at some clips online from the original quality versus what they've done with the remaster, I can imagine the IMAX is just going to be such a sensational experience. There was specifically the chase scene where Major is trying to hunt down a lead to find this hacker, and I found simultaneously the animation to be super enthralling, but also showing some wear and tear of aging, and that came with some jitteriness at times and some issues with character movement overall that just aren't going to be as smooth as what you get from a lot of modern animation. But there's this point I want to make where it almost becomes a part of the appeal. Yes, there's going to be some movies now that are smoother and don't have as many rough edges, but seeing those rough edges can actually be a part of the immersive artistic experience. It's like when you go to see a play and there's differences every single time because performances are going to change night to night. You almost see the artistic imprint in that sense with how the animation is being portrayed and trying to utilize its limited resources for the time. So I'm about to say a lot about certain things holding other things not, but I want to say it's not always a bad thing for something to show its age. Sometimes that can actually be a part of the beauty. Sounding like an overly pretentious art student, it's the flaws that aren't really flaws. All right, sorry, rant over. A quick word from today's sponsor. Campfire? Is that you? Did you break into my home to take revenge on me? How dare you? I know that I murdered your family and ran over your dog, but you earned it. Doesn't matter what features you offer now. I'm going... Stop. You can't do this. I don't care about the map makers. I don't care about the story or character organizers. Not even the timeline. Doesn't matter that you offer it choose your own pricing. Your child deserved that bullet. It's inappropriate for you to be breaking into my home. Is that you scrawling something in the wall? Is it the link that's usually in the description for people to go check out your wonderful service? This psychological game is sick. It is sick! Oh, it's a great community you have of people you're probably turning against me at this very moment. Are they all coming for me? Is this a purge It feels like a purge situation. Okay. That's spooky breathing right there. Boy, I hope no one checks out that link in the description to join your cause of taking me down. Oh no, it's a fake gun. I'm gonna die. And my lord, does this movie benefit from just taking its time to let you marinate in its world. Something I wish more movies of any kind did, of just allowing beats, sitting you as an audience member to just observe the population, the city, the atmosphere. And this movie, though, was just like, ooh, it needed it and it executed it flawlessly, because there's a lot of world building that has to be done here for this cyberpunk exploration, and a tremendous amount of it is accomplished through just these slow beats of observing how life is for these people in this mega city where, you know, we've reached these technological highs without overcoming really any of our socio problems, which, you know, is looking rather likely. So while some people might complain that it has some of these slow-paced moments, my taste will just not align with that criticism, because I'm always someone who, whether I'm in a book or in a movie or in a show, enjoys when the creators are allowing me to just enjoy what they're putting so much effort into building. And this is still one of the best in terms of the music and the visuals and the sound design, all allowing those just lovely moments. But okay, that's all technical elements, small structural things. Let's talk about the story itself. Does that hold up? I would say almost entirely yes. And I was nervous getting into it that the answer could be no, because if you ignore the fact that so many other movies have taken from Ghost in the Shell, so a lot of what made a huge impact on the audiences originally might be lessened due to having seen so much of it again and again and again, that really wasn't a factor here. I actually was enjoying moment for moment pretty much every bit of this narrative. So the basic premise, though, is we are watching a cyborg enforcer go about their life and trying to hunt down this mysterious hacker, and things escalate from there. We have some truly incredible action set pieces that were, of course, groundbreaking for the time, but I still think, well, it's really interesting seeing so clearly movies that pulled from these scenes borderline to a point where it's just theft. I, of course, have a deep, passionate love for the Matrix trilogy, but if you watch the first Matrix movie alongside Ghost in the Shell, there's especially on the visual level some things taken where you're like, couldn't change that a bit more, maybe? But I don't think any movie has done this exact plot line as well or close enough to this plot and where it ends up going and the commentary it has enough to detract from the experience on a story level here. The character level a little bit, because we have a lot of what have become cyberpunk cliches. Big burly man enforcers, the overly cybernized people, the people who kind of more reject it, keep it minimal, and our main protagonist who is more in the heavily cybernetically augmented side of things. And then there's also the exploration of manipulation and attacking of people through all this cyberware, which is something that's become tropes of the genre, except they're used so smartly and cleverly within the narrative, and it all fits so well to build in with that magnificent world building that even though it's a trope, it just feels 100% necessary for the narrative. I can see if you are someone, though, who is not used to cyberpunk in its original form, a very slow burn genre that's about our flaws of humanity, you know, only being exacerbated through the usage of technology, and you're more used to the kind of faster, more action-packed cyberpunk we've seen sometimes, where they don't really get as deep into those themes, you might complain like, hey, I expected more of an action flick, but there is enough action here, I think, to satisfy most, especially with how impactful it is, but it's slow burn action. So Pips wanted me to re-articulate something I said at this point in the review, and I can't tell him no. So what I want to get hitting on is the characters here are probably another weak point for the film overall. I did find our main protagonist, the Major, to be conceptually very interesting, but then if you actually just strip away the surface level stuff and look at the personality of the character underneath, I don't find too much there to be super compelling. And then her second is kind of just a stereotype of sci-fi in general, and everyone beyond that is either just serving a purpose for what they are trying to accomplish for the plot, or so transparently just a filler idea or body that it becomes extraordinarily forgettable. So while I find the main protagonist very recognizable and knowable just on what she is, the who beyond the what begins to fail. And I would be extremely remiss if I did not get into the deeper meanings put forth in Ghost in the Shell through themes. Of course, as is often common in cyberpunk, it explores what exactly it means to be human, but I think that's a very rudimentary surface level evaluation of what ideas are put forth here, because cyberpunk as a genre was still pretty new in this time. I mean, I guess in the grand scheme of genre, cyberpunk's pretty new still as a whole, but with Neuromancer still almost being fresh, and that's essentially the genre starter for cyberpunk, Ghost in the Shell, even though it was so early, it still feels like it's got into these ideas in a more nuanced ways than a lot of the more mature cyberpunk stories we're seeing now. I especially want to get into the main climax. The actual, final here is really more just a monologue and exploration of the philosophies this movie's been lightly touching on throughout the narrative. And what we see is, yes, there is the typical exploration in cyberpunk of what makes us human, but there's also this idea of what will continue to make us human as technology fundamentally changes who and what we are. So if we begin to merge with those and that we have created that has gone far beyond our own abilities, with technology inventing and improving itself, which is something that Ghost in the Shell seems to be really ahead of its contemporaries on. I love that as the credits started to roll, I didn't actually feel like I finished the character's story, but Ghost in the Shell did everything it needed to do to make me understand the ideas it was exploring. And so, yeah, that's when the story needed to end, because it's not the story of the main character. It's the story of this specific set of circumstances that lead to a next step in evolution of us, and that's all that needs to be commentated on. So it makes me nervous to see there's a Ghost in the Shell 2, because this was an extremely well executed beginning to end of a narrative, and I'm just hesitant to get anything that promises to be a sequel, because I don't know if it feels necessarily necessary. See what I mean? But where I want the most of the focus of this review, though, to be on really the influence this movie has had in the larger conversation that I, as someone who is getting more and more into anime, has realized is just how drastically Hollywood has taken from anime without really crediting it much. I gave the Matrix example before, but after my recent experience getting deeper into Ghibli, getting into movies like Akira, it's become so apparent that anime, before in the time of the internet especially, where people could easily point out these direct comparisons, was something that creatives in Hollywood would just mine from for their live action movies. And I'm not trying to say oh, these people are blatantly stealing. I mean, it's going to be a case by case thing, but it's interesting to see how some of the most respected people in Hollywood were taking from a medium that during that time, when this was happening most apparently, at least in my experience so far, was looked down upon by so many. And I would assume many of these masterful creatives like the Wachowskis were people who just, loved the medium and didn't have that same snobbery, and so it started to influence their work as well, which is kind of the most giving way you could phrase that in a review. But there could be essays and video after video getting into the influence from a medium that was so dismissed, that's kind of sucks, right? I'm just glad that we're seeing the change now, where movies like Ghost in the Shell, I'm seeing more often infiltrate top 100 films of all time lists, because it kind of earns it. And the final note I'll spin off from there on is I do see a lot of the visuals that have been taken for other movies like District 9, Elysium, The Matrix, where, some of those more so, some of those less so. Sometimes it's just a taste of an influence. But yes, a lot of those live actions have done a cyberpunk dystopia very, very well, but the medium of anime, especially after Akira, Ghost in the Shell, and the Blade Runner anime movie, which I highly recommend, I do think this medium conveys the genre in a way that I haven't seen live action do as effectively yet. Maybe the only case being Blade Runner 2049. I mean, it takes such a higher level of effort and budget to actually create a cyber world that you can just much more easily artistically do in anime. But Ghost in the Shell quite wonderfully uses its style and atmosphere that only can be accomplished through the exaggerated, art of anime to just thrust you in this dystopia so much deeper and have to work for it so much less hard than a live action would. And wow, I don't normally take the time to talk about a movie's soundtrack and, the score, but if you are someone who writes or studies, put on the Ghost in the Shell album on whatever streaming service you prefer, and I promise you, you will be lost in this atmospheric sound journey. Delicious. So while there is some rust on the structural level and there's an issue with the English version, I do think for a movie that's getting close to 30 years old, Ghost in the Shell holds up remarkably well. And that's because at its core, it is a vibrant, passionate, thoughtful, patient telling of a story that is so powerful. It's inspired a whole genre of sci-fi live action creators, and if you're someone who's a fan of the genre, you'd be doing yourself a massive disservice not to watch it, or if you haven't seen it since it came out, or since you were much younger, rewatching and appreciating once again now. This is probably going to be a movie I put on every couple of years just to appreciate the influence and the artistry that goes in on all levels. I mean, to have visuals that hold up 30 years later, most movies, especially live action, cannot make that claim, so good on you, Ghost in the Shell. You have transcended the time you were released in to be in my list of just must-watch sci-fi movies. But anyway, let me know what you think of Ghost in the Shell in the comments down below. Do you love it? Do you think it holds up as well as I'm saying? Or do you think it has some more issues? Let me know in the comments down below. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. And have a good one, y'all. Peace.